Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating piece of source material that analyzes a recent major event, the drone strike on the Kapotnya oil refinery in Moscow. We aren't just going to look at the explosion itself, though. Instead, we're going to trace the massive, cascading domino effect that follows an event exactly like this. By breaking down this analysis, we're going to understand how a single physical strike can ripple out to completely paralyze logistics, expose massive technical blind spots, and even trigger fierce societal debates. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Our source material gives us a quote that, honestly, completely reframes how we typically think about military success. Often official reports just focus on sheer numbers, saying, for example, that dozens or even hundreds of drones were intercepted. But our source makes a critical analytical point. They state, the effectiveness of air defense is not assessed by the number of targets shot down, but by whether the enemy accomplished its task. Let's think about that for a second. If you shoot down 999 out of 1,000 incoming drones, but that single, lone remaining drone hits its primary target and completely halts a vital oil refinery, well, the defensive effort was effectively unsuccessful. The objective of the strike was achieved. And that crucial perspective sets the stage for everything we're going to examine today. So here's our roadmap for the explainer today. First, we'll cover the Kapotnya strike itself. Second, evaluating the air defenses. Third, technical blind spots. Fourth, the logistical domino effect. And finally, number 5, public reaction and fallout.
Section 1. The Kapotnya strike, target and impact.
The number 5 is absolutely crucial here. According to the source material, experts analyzing the aftermath of this refinery strike identified at least 5 distinct focal points of fire within the plant's territory. So this wasn't just a superficial graze, right? The source notes that the impact hit a reservoir likely filled with high-octane gasoline, which caused a massive explosion rather than just a standard fire. And the immediate result of these 5 impact zones? Well, the refinery, which, by the way, provides a huge portion of Moscow's entire fuel supply, was completely knocked out of operation. Crucially, our source points out that any attempts to quickly rebuild are just going to attract secondary strikes, basically rendering the facility inactive for the foreseeable future. Moving on to Section 2, Evaluating Air Defenses, a comparative look. And this brilliantly illustrates the gap between how early warning networks are theoretically supposed to function versus how they're reportedly functioning around Moscow. The source contrasts the situation with Israel's highly integrated system. In Israel, a launch from afar is detected almost immediately by satellites or recon planes. That offers roughly a full 10-minute early warning, which is then followed by localized sirens way before impact. Contrast this with the source's analysis of the Russian defense. The analysis claims that the theoretical 3 rings of early detection around Moscow are simply missing, or at least non-functional. So instead of intercepting threats far, far outside the region, the defense relies heavily on localized, short-range systems right at the target site. This means the threat is literally already over the city before it's even engaged.
Section 3. Technical blind spots, radars and missiles.
So why exactly are these localized systems struggling so much with incoming drones? To understand this, we have to talk about the radar horizon. The source defines this as a boundary, or essentially a dead zone, below which large, sophisticated radar systems just cannot detect low-flying targets. Think about massive, long-range defense systems like the S-300 or S-400. They're designed to look high up into the sky. According to the analysis, if a slow-moving drone creeps in at an altitude of just 100 meters, it slips completely beneath the electronic gaze of those huge, expensive radar systems. It's essentially flying under the radar, making those long-range missile systems completely useless against them. Because those long-range systems are essentially blind to the low-flying threat, the defense falls entirely to short-range, localized systems like the Pantsir. But the source breaks down a truly catastrophic sequence of events here. Step 1. The drone approaches at that low altitude we just talked about. Step 2. The localized system fires, but according to video evidence cited by the source, the missiles actually miss the slow-moving drone entirely, and that's even in ideal straight-line flight conditions with 0 electronic jamming. And then Step 3, and this is perhaps the most shocking claim from the analysis, that massive fuel reservoir explosion, it wasn't actually caused by the drone itself. It was reportedly caused collaterally by an anti-aircraft missile from the Pantsir system missing its target and slamming directly into the refinery. And get this, even when the localized air defenses do manage to score a hit, it's rarely a clean victory. The source observes that the anti-aircraft missiles often fail to completely obliterate the incoming drones midair. Instead of detonating the drone's payload, the strike might just, say, shear off a wing or damage the tail controls. So what happens then? Well, the damaged drones maintain their general flight paths and crash uncontrollably into unintended, often civilian areas, like the nearby Savadov market that the source mentions. The payload still detonates upon ground impact, causing immense collateral damage.
All right, Section 4, the logistics domino effect, fuel, flights, and freight. So the crucial point we're getting at is that striking one single physical target, the Kapotnia refinery, triggers an immediate, massive logistical crisis for an entire capital city. The breakdown derived from the source is wild. In the airport sector, the immediate threat of drones paralyzed airspace, leading to approximately 500 canceled flights. In the aviation fuel sector, because this specific refinery produces a huge chunk of the city's aviation kerosene, official notices established immediate jet fuel refueling restrictions. That forces planes to fly with much tighter margins. And most alarmingly, in the city supply sector, taking out half of the city's diesel supply directly threatens the daily food and freight logistics of a sprawling megacity.
The source goes on to list the severe secondary vulnerabilities created by this whole domino effect. First, to compensate for the lost refinery, fuel now has to be desperately diverted by rail from other regions. Second, because you can't just dump rail cars full of fuel straight into local gas stations, there is a suddenly increased reliance on centralized, highly vulnerable storage depots, like the Pavlitskaya oil depot, which instantly makes them obvious future targets. And finally, the source draws a really stark parallel to a 2005 blackout in Moscow. In that incident, a single electrical substation failure cascaded into a citywide grid collapse. The underlying vulnerability of centralized infrastructure means that if logistics or power are hit in a targeted way, a city that relies on supply from wheels, meaning constant daily truck deliveries, can just grind to an absolute halt. Finally, Section 5, Public Reaction and Fallout, the Internal Response. Now, what's really interesting about this is the societal paradox the source identifies in the aftermath of the strike. Traditionally, you have this state security monopoly, right? Citizens and businesses pay their taxes, and in return, the state holds the monopoly on violence and provides protection and overall security. However, the source notes a rather bizarre shift in online commentary, where individuals are now actually demanding private responsibility. You have commentators angrily demanding that private business owners, like the folks running the refinery, should be forced to purchase and operate their own private air defense systems to protect their infrastructure. The source rightly points out how completely paradoxical this is. I mean, if businesses have to go out and buy their own anti-aircraft missiles, what exactly is the state providing in return for their taxes? Which brings us to our final thought. Based on absolutely everything our source has laid out today, from the glaring blind spots of multi-million-dollar radar systems, all the way to the cascading logistical nightmares caused by a single refinery fire, we really have to ask, are centralized megacities fundamentally vulnerable when cheap drone technology can completely bypass traditional, expensive air defenses? It's a question that completely redefines our understanding of modern infrastructure and security. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.